Hello, everyone. Before today's story begins, we'd like to share a quick message. YouTube recently removed our monetization, cutting off our income. If you enjoy this story, we humbly ask for just $1 to help pay our staff so they can make a living and keep creating for you. Thank you for saving us. Now, let's begin the story. It arrived without a single whisper of warning. On a radiant Tuesday afternoon, while billions of people went about their perfectly mundane routines, an 8-kilometer-long mass of pitch-black metal materialized in low Earth orbit. There were no flashing sirens. No deep space observatories issued frantic alerts. The cosmic abyss simply parted in silence, and a monolith of unimaginable terror dropped into our sky. It cast a jagged, oppressive shadow that felt infinitely heavier than its physical form, plunging entire continents into an unnatural twilight as it rotated lazily above the atmosphere. The sheer scale of the object defied all human comprehension. It was a colossal spearhead of alien design, hovering completely still against the backdrop of the fragile blue planet. The metal hull absorbed all visible light, reflecting absolutely nothing of the sun that beat down upon it. Astronomers scrambling to calibrate their lenses found themselves staring into a void, a dead zone in the heavens. It was an Alpha-class warship, an obsolete Titan belonging to the Kalan Empire. Of course, humanity did not know that name yet, not until the broadcast began. The identification signal did not arrive in a blaze of sophisticated quantum encryption or complex linguistic matrices. It was an insultingly simple transmission. A string of basic binary code began pulsating steadily across all global radio frequencies, brutally overriding every television broadcast, every military channel, and every civilian network on Earth. Translating the signal took the world's supercomputers less than 2 minutes. The message was ruthlessly cold, utterly devoid of any diplomatic warmth or formal greeting. It simply stated that the Kalan Empire, in its infinite benevolence, was gifting humanity a decommissioned warship. The Leviathan orbiting above was classified as scrap metal, intended for recycling. It was presented as a cosmic charity drop from a superior species to an infant race. At first, the United Nations dissolved into a frenzy of euphoric chaos. Politicians and world leaders spoke of a golden age dawning upon mankind. They hailed the event as a historic milestone, a miraculous shortcut that would propel human technology forward by at least 1,000 years. Emergency committees were instantly formed behind closed doors, with superpowers aggressively debating how the lucrative spoils of this alien carcass would be divided. They imagined reverse engineering propulsion drives, impenetrable armor, and limitless energy sources. But this naive, greedy optimism evaporated almost as quickly as it had formed. The silent stillness of the monolith was not peaceful. It was deeply, innately predatory. Dr. Ella Foster, a leading astrophysicist whose tired eyes had been glued to the telemetry data since the very second the object appeared, was the first to notice the terrifying anomaly. While generals and diplomats argued over salvage rights, she isolated herself in her laboratory, staring intently at the atmospheric distortion readings. The dead ship was not entirely dead. Its dormant energy core was bleeding. Ella identified a microscopic but relentlessly expanding microgravity field leaking from the scarred belly of the vessel. It acted like an invisible tumor, quietly tethering itself to the Earth. She ran the complex simulations dozens of times, staying awake for 3 consecutive days, desperately praying for a mathematical error in her calculations. There was absolutely none. The localized gravity field was slowly, methodically dragging the atmospheric envelope of the planet outward into the cold vacuum of space. Within exactly 20 years, the Earth would be completely stripped of its breathable air. Billions of innocent souls would suffocate in a slow, agonizing, global asphyxiation. The Kalen Empire had not sent a gift. Their charitable donation was a flawless, cowardly execution method. It was a slow death sentence that did not require them to fire a single bullet, launch a single missile, or risk a single soldier. They had located a highly habitable planet infested with a budding, potentially troublesome civilization, and they had simply decided to fumigate it. The decommissioned warship was nothing more than a passive pest control device, perfectly designed to eradicate humanity while maintaining the plausible deniability of an unprovoked military strike. It was a sick, arrogant joke played on a cosmic scale. When Dr. Ella Foster presented her undisputed findings to the Global Defense Council, the initial wave of denial quickly mutated into sheer, paralyzing terror, and then finally exploded into unprecedented global outrage. The streets of every major city swelled with panic and despair. An invisible, inescapable guillotine had been firmly placed over the collective neck of humanity. But amid the screaming politicians, the weeping civilians, and the terrified military commanders, Ella Foster stood perfectly motionless. Her brilliant mind was already racing far beyond the pathetic confines of fear. She confidently stepped forward and demanded the floor. The world leaders, desperate for any tiny sliver of salvation, fell completely silent. "They think we are pathetic scavengers," Ella said, her voice carrying a cold, piercing resonance that echoed through the grand, silent hall. "They threw us their garbage, fully expecting us to choke on it. They expect us to spend the next 2 decades weeping like terrified children while our air bleeds into the dark. We will absolutely not give them that satisfaction. They handed us a noose, but they severely underestimated who they handed it to. We are not going to sit here and wait for the end. We are going to take this very rope, weave it into the deadliest weapon this galaxy has ever seen, and we are going to strangle the Kalen Empire with it." Her profound words hung in the stale air, a definitive declaration of sheer, unadulterated human defiance. The paralyzing fear in the council room did not completely vanish, but it dramatically shifted form. It hardened and solidified into a dark, unforgiving, and desperate resolve. The Kalen Empire thought they had casually delivered a tombstone to a dying world, but in their arrogant blindness, they had merely provided the raw materials for their own impending nightmare. The initial insertion operation was terrifyingly blunt. Bypassing standard safety protocols in favor of raw, desperate speed, Dr. Ella Foster did not send automated drones or remote probes into the belly of the beast. She knew that machines with their rigid, predictable logic would fail to navigate an environment designed by an alien consciousness. Instead, she personally led an expeditionary force consisting of exactly 60 of the most reckless, brilliant, and arguably insane engineers humanity had to offer. They breached the outer hull using industrial plasma cutters, slicing through thick armor plating that was inexplicably cold to the touch. When the heavy outer airlock finally gave way with a silent, agonizing groan, the team stepped out of their transport shuttle and into the crushing darkness of the alien monolith. They were completely cut off from the light of the sun, swallowed whole by a dead world hovering silently in the vacuum of space. The interior of the Kalen warship was not built for human comfort, nor did it adhere to any architectural logic that made sense to the mammalian brain. It was a suffocating, labyrinthine nightmare of twisting corridors and jagged bulkheads that seemed to fold inward on themselves. There were no straight lines anywhere, every surface curved at unnatural angles, covered in a strange non-reflective polymer that absorbed the intense beams of their shoulder-mounted flashlights like a dry sponge soaking up water. But the true, visceral horror of the ship was not its oppressive architecture. It was the complete, terrifying absence of physical laws. With every cautious step the team took, the fundamental vector of gravity violently shifted. One moment, they were walking along what appeared to be a solid metal floor. The next, a nauseating lurch would pull them sideways, forcing their heavy magnetic boots to violently clamp onto the vertical walls, just to keep them from falling into a bottomless, horizontal abyss. The dark corridors spiraled upward into dizzying corkscrews, where up and down became entirely meaningless concepts, completely shattering the basic laws of physics. Several veteran engineers vomited inside their pressurized helmets, their inner ears completely overwhelmed by the violently shifting gravimetric tides. They were crawling through the frozen intestines of a god, navigating a space where the fundamental rules of the universe had been casually rewritten and then violently discarded. Yet, driven by the sheer force of Ella Foster's unwavering command, the 60 men and women pushed deeper into the abyss, their vitals spiking with every erratic shift in the ship's artificial environment. After what felt like an absolute eternity of agonizing progress, the twisting metal veins of the ship finally dilated, opening up into a cavernous central chamber that was large enough to easily house an entire modern human city. This was the beating heart of the dreadnought, or at least what was left of it. The engineers fanned out, their helmet lights sweeping across a massive, spherical containment structure suspended in the dead center of the vast void by thousands of thick, interlocking metallic cables. The engineering team immediately brought out their diagnostic equipment, fully expecting to find the cold, radioactive ashes of an advanced nuclear fusion reactor, or perhaps the remnants of a decayed antimatter drive. But the readouts on their digital screens immediately and violently flashed red, displaying numbers that openly defied reality. The dead center of the ship was not a nuclear reactor. Suspended within the heart of the colossal machine, perfectly still and completely terrifying, was an artificial black hole. It was a captive singularity, a microscopic tear in the very fabric of space-time itself, held in place by forces humanity could barely begin to theorize, let alone construct. The sheer, overwhelming reality of looking directly at a physical manifestation of infinite density brought the entire expeditionary team to a grinding, breathless halt. They were standing mere inches away from the ultimate cosmic predator, shackled and chained by alien engineering. Ella moved closer to the edge of the platform, her eyes scanning the massive magnetic confinement rings that caged the singularity. The Kalan Empire had not simply abandoned the ship and left it intact. They had meticulously and deliberately sabotaged it. The massive primary containment fields were shattered, their focusing lenses physically melted down by intense, deliberate heat. The alien engineers had permanently crippled the safety mechanisms before casting the ship adrift. As Ella rapidly analyzed the decay rate of the secondary backup fields, the full, horrific elegance of the Cullen execution plan became terrifyingly clear to everyone in the room. The warship was intentionally designed to eventually lose its orbital velocity and crash violently into the surface of the Earth. Upon impact, the remaining weakened magnetic rings would completely shatter under the kinetic force. The unbound black hole would then drop directly through the crust and into the planetary core. From the inside out, it would slowly, methodically devour the entire world, crunching down mighty mountains, vast oceans, and billions of lives into a single, infinitesimal point of darkness. It was a trap perfectly engineered to turn the Earth into its own executioner. Panic immediately began to ripple through the radio communications as the 60 engineers realized they were standing directly on top of a ticking doomsday device. But Ella Foster simply reached up, keyed her microphone, and commanded absolute silence. "We are not going to fix their broken locks," she stated, her voice slicing through the panicked static with icy, clinical precision. "If we try to repair the magnetic confinement rings to match the original alien design, we will absolutely fail. We lack the specific exotic alloys, and we lack the time, but we do not actually need to contain it. We are going to harness it." The sheer audacity of her statement bordered on absolute madness. But her scientific genius was undeniable, working frantically under the dim emergency lights. Ella and her team did not waste precious time trying to rebuild the shattered alien cage. Instead, they began ruthlessly ripping apart the secondary environmental systems and the massive structural supports of the cavern itself. Using every ounce of their collective intellect, they initiated a desperate process of reverse engineering the containment protocol, rather than pushing the magnetic fields inward to suppress the singularity. Ella calculated a brilliant way to invert the entire system. They were going to forcefully reverse the polarity of the surrounding gravimetric generators, effectively creating a massive, unstable resonance chamber entirely around the event horizon. It was an incredibly dangerous scientific gamble. If her complex mathematics were off by even 1/10 of a single percent, the black hole would instantly expand and violently swallow them all. For 72 grueling hours, the team lived inside the nightmare labyrinth, splicing thick human power cables into delicate alien conduits, bypassing the broken systems with brute force human ingenuity. Finally, covered in sweat and grease, Ella manually threw the heavy primary breaker. A violent, blinding shockwave of blue light immediately ripped through the massive chamber. The enormous space shook violently, metal groaning heavily under the immense, sudden pressure. And then, a low, incredibly steady hum began to vibrate deeply through the deck plates. The violent gravitational collapse that was actively threatening the planet had been successfully caught in an infinite loop of mirrored polarity. Humanity had successfully tamed the cosmic monster. In doing so, they had not just saved their world. They had just forged a magnificent engine capable of delivering absolutely limitless, staggering amounts of raw electrical power. The dead alien ship had finally awoken, and it now belonged entirely to them. The initiation of Project Abyss marked the beginning of the most frantic, desperate, and magnificent industrial revolution in the history of mankind. It was a mobilization of labor and resources so incredibly massive that it fundamentally altered the global economy overnight. The skies above Earth were constantly painted with the fiery exhaust trails of heavy lift rockets. Every single day, over 2 million tons of raw terrestrial steel, dense tungsten, and reinforced titanium were violently blasted into the upper atmosphere. The silence of the orbital graveyard was entirely shattered by the relentless, deafening roar of human industry. Swarms of automated construction drones and thousands of human welders in heavy, pressurized spacesuits descended upon the dark alien monolith like a hive of furious, mechanized insects. They were not there to study the vessel. They were there to butcher it, tear it apart, and forcefully remake it in the violent image of human warfare. The Kalan Empire, in their arrogant thoroughness, had meticulously stripped the Alpha-class warship of all its original offensive armaments before sending it to Earth. The plasma batteries were gone. The laser arrays were completely gutted. The missile bays were entirely hollowed out, leaving nothing but dead wiring and empty launch tubes. But the human engineering teams, fueled by a potent cocktail of righteous planetary fury and absolute scientific madness, simply accepted this harsh reality and immediately pivoted. They realized they did not need alien blasters when they controlled the very fabric of gravity itself. If they took the bullets, we will simply use the ocean, Ella Foster declared during a tense engineering briefing, slamming her fist against a holographic schematic of the dreadnought. We have a captive singularity humming in the basement. We are going to turn their entire internal gravity network into the largest ballistic slingshot the universe has ever witnessed. Driven by this terrifying vision, human crews began grafting monstrous, brutalist artillery barrels directly onto the sleek, curved alien hull. These crude mechanical cannons, each measuring over 500 feet in length and forged from the thickest armor plating Earth could manufacture, looked like jagged iron thorns violently piercing the smooth, black skin of the ship. They were not designed to fire unstable chemical explosives or focused beams of light. Instead, massive robotic loading arms fed solid, ultra-dense pillars of tungsten directly into the firing chambers. By temporarily routing the immense gravitational pull of the captive black hole directly through the ship's internal manipulation network, these heavy metallic pillars would be caught in a localized gravity whip. The extreme mass of the black hole would violently accelerate the solid ammunition around the event horizon, building up catastrophic kinetic energy before violently releasing it straight out the human-made barrels at over 99% of the speed of light. It was a weapon of pure, unadulterated kinetic devastation, capable of shattering small moons with a single volley. Simultaneously, deep within the flickering tactical center of the ship, Ella Foster and her hand-picked team of 300 elite software architects were brutally rewriting the alien code. The original spatial navigation and defensive radar systems of the Kalen vessel were highly advanced, designed to detect incoming threats across vast cosmic distances. Ella and her team did not just hack the system. They completely inverted its fundamental physical purpose by forcefully manipulating the gravimetric waves emitted by the core. They created a dynamic distortion field that tightly wrapped around the entire 8-kilometer length of the dreadnought. This intense field actively bent both ambient light and radar waves entirely around the hull, swallowing all thermal emissions and electronic signatures into the void. They transformed a massive, obsolete battleship into a perfect, undetectable ghost. It would be entirely invisible to any known scanning technology until the exact second it decided to pull the trigger. What slowly emerged from the orbital shipyards over the next 36 months was a true mechanical abomination. The once elegant, seamless aesthetic of the Kalen engineering was completely mutilated, heavily scarred by thousands of thick weld lines, massive industrial exhaust vents, and the brutal, unforgiving geometry of human steel. It was a terrifying, hybridized monster. It perfectly married the unfathomable, godlike sophistication of alien astrophysics with the crude, ugly, and uncompromising brutality of human military doctrine. It was an absolute insult to the delicate art of interstellar starship design, resembling a crude street brawler wearing the stolen, heavily modified armor of a dead knight. In the freezing, absolute darkness of outer space, the colossal vessel no longer drifted like an empty, hollow tomb. As the final power couplings were locked into place and the endless streams of supply shuttles finally pulled away, a deep, resonant hum began to heavily vibrate through the thick, armored plating. The massive engines burned with a fierce, terrifying new purpose. The ship trembled, not from structural failure, but from the immense, barely contained kinetic fury boiling within its metal veins. It throbbed with the steady, violent heartbeat of an apex predator that had just opened its eyes in the dark, absolutely starving for a hunt, and desperately eager to test its newly forged claws against the throat of the empire that had tried to throw it away. Exactly 36 months after the massive black metal coffin was casually tossed into orbit, the fabric of space near the dark edge of the outer solar system silently folded inward. A sleek, silver Kalen scout vessel slipped out of faster-than-light transit, gliding through the icy void like a polished silver dagger, cutting through black silk. Its mission was entirely bureaucratic and supremely arrogant. The Empire did not send a heavily armed armada to check on a world they considered already dead. They sent a low-ranking archival team consisting of mere clerks and junior scientists. Their sole objective was to record the expected planetary asphyxiation, collect atmospheric samples of the dead rock, and officially catalog the agonizing extinction of humanity for the vast, dusty imperial databases. The alien commander sat lazily in his heavily cushioned command chair, sipping a warm, mildly intoxicating liquid, fully expecting to look upon a barren, suffocated sphere completely stripped of its thin blue halo. But as the scout ship's advanced optical sensors and deep space telemetry arrays finally locked onto the third planet from the local star, the bridge of the alien vessel descended into a state of absolute, chaotic panic. The Earth was not a dead, brown husk. It was violently, aggressively alive. The deep blue oceans sparkled under the harsh light of the sun, and thick, swirling white storm systems danced beautifully across rich green continents. The atmospheric pressure was perfectly stable, absolutely brimming with life-giving oxygen, more terrifying than the surviving planet. However, was the complete and total absence of their weapon. The commander dropped his glass, shattering it against the floor, and ordered a full spectrum scan, demanding his technicians sweep every single radio frequency, thermal band, and gravimetric wave in the entire local sector. They found absolutely nothing. The 8-kilometer-long, millions of tons heavy Alpha-class dreadnought had simply vanished. There was no debris field indicating a structural failure. There was no residual radiation from a core breach. It was as if the colossal machine had been plucked from existence by an invisible hand. The alien crew stared at their glowing consoles in utter disbelief, their arrogant composure completely shattering under the weight of an impossible reality. A frantic, heavily encrypted distress pulse was immediately fired back to the Kalan High Command. The Imperial bureaucrats, sitting comfortably on their distant, glittering throne world, were completely baffled. A primitive, barely spacefaring species could not simply misplace an Imperial dreadnought, nor could they possibly survive a targeted gravimetric collapse. Humiliated and deeply confused, the Kalan political apparatus desperately scrambled to regain control of the narrative. They immediately drafted a heavily broadcasted, agonizingly hypocritical diplomatic transmission. This new message completely ignored their previous broadcast, which had so generously labeled the ship as recycled scrap. Instead, the icy, synthetic voice of the Kalan ambassador filled the communications channels of Earth with thinly veiled venom. The message formally accused the human race of violently hijacking highly classified Imperial military property. It cited obscure, ancient galactic security treaties, condemning humanity as reckless thieves and demanding the immediate, unconditional return of the vessel. The ambassador threatened severe economic and martial sanctions, painting the Empire as a victim of unprovoked primitive aggression. Inside the highly fortified underground bunker of the United Nations, a tense, suffocating silence gripped the global leaders. Sweating politicians nervously loosened their ties, instinctively wanting to draft a groveling response. Several prominent figures practically begged the Council to open diplomatic channels, to explain, to negotiate, to beg for a peaceful resolution before the aliens decided to use direct force. But Dr. Ella Foster stood firmly at the head of the massive obsidian conference table, her presence commanding absolute authority. She slammed her hand flat against the smooth surface, stopping a terrified European Prime Minister mid-sentence. "Do not touch that broadcasting key," Ella ordered, her voice a low, dangerous hiss that commanded the entire room. "Do not send a single word. Do not deny their ridiculous accusations, and absolutely do not offer them any pathetic explanations." They expected to find a graveyard, and instead, they found a missing gun. Right now, they are completely blind, stumbling around in the dark, absolutely terrified of what we might have done. The moment we speak, we give them a target. We give them a psychological foothold. Let them drown in their own paranoid delusions. The Global Defense Council, thoroughly intimidated by Ella's iron will and undeniable strategic brilliance, complied. For 7 agonizing, excruciatingly long days, Earth offered nothing but absolute, deafening silence. Every single communication channel remained firmly closed. Every diplomatic frequency was met with the cold, static hiss of empty space. This unified, fiercely proud silence was a monumental act of psychological warfare. It was the ultimate insult to an arrogant empire that demanded instant obedience. To the Kalan High Command, humanity's refusal to even acknowledge their threats was an unforgivable slap across the face. The deafening quiet stripped away their thin, elegant veneer of bureaucratic superiority, exposing their raw, wounded pride. Enraged by the blatant disrespect from a species they considered barely sentient insects, the Kalan emperor officially discarded the fragile mask of diplomacy. He furiously signed the execution order. The time for passive pest control and political games was over. He ordered the immediate mobilization of the 7th Punitive Fleet, determined to personally burn the silent, arrogant planet down to glass and ash. The fabric of reality at the absolute freezing edge of the solar system did not merely fold this time. It was violently ripped apart. A jagged, bleeding tear in the cosmic canvas erupted with a blinding flash of violent purple light, vomiting forth the 7th Punitive Fleet of the Kalan Empire. 12 apex super-dreadnoughts, representing the absolute pinnacle of imperial naval engineering, glided into the harsh light of the distant sun. These were not obsolete scrap heaps. Each of the 12 vessels was a pristine, heavily armored leviathan, stretching over 15 kilometers in length, their sleek silver hulls glowing with the immense radioactive power of multiple active fusion cores. They moved with a terrifying, synchronized grace, forming a predatory crescent moon formation that was mathematically designed to maximize overlapping fields of annihilating fire. The sheer, overwhelming thermal radiation emitting from their primary engine blocks alone possessed enough raw destructive energy to boil away the entire Pacific Ocean and flash fry the continental crust of Earth into a sea of molten glass. As the magnificent, deadly armada surged forward along a direct intercept trajectory toward the inner planets, they did not simply ignore the fragile infrastructure of humanity. They actively and maliciously swept the void clean. The fleet commander ordered his tactical officers to engage their secondary point defense lasers, treating human space installations like irritating dust particles on a freshly polished mirror. Deep space research outposts in the asteroid belt were instantly vaporized into expanding clouds of superheated plasma. Automated early warning satellites orbiting Mars were systematically blinded and shattered into millions of useless metal splinters. Even the heavily shielded lunar observation relays, Earth's final line of orbital sight, were reduced to glowing craters of liquid rock in a matter of mere fractions of a second. The destruction was so casual, it bordered on absolute boredom for the alien gunners. The Kalan advance was a masterclass in effortless, surgical eradication, leaving absolutely nothing but dead silence in their wake. They were completely blinding the human race, ensuring the condemned planet would not even have the privilege of watching their executioners approach until the massive shadows of the dreadnoughts physically darkened their skies. When the 12 glowing titans finally established a geosynchronous high orbit directly above the planetary equator, blocking out the sun and casting monstrous, jagged shadows across multiple time zones, a new transmission violently seized control of every global network. The Kalan fleet commander did not show his face, choosing instead to broadcast his voice accompanied by the terrifying live tactical feed of his fully armed weapon batteries. "Citizens of the stolen world!" The cold, heavily synthesized voice boomed from every speaker and screen on the planet. "Your pathetic, insolent silence has officially condemned you. You possess exactly 60 minutes to initiate an unconditional, global surrender. Your leaders will transmit their biometric submission codes, and you will prepare for immediate planetary subjugation. If you fail to comply within the allotted 1 hour, we will ignite our primary annihilation arrays. We will roast your atmosphere, boil your oceans, and permanently reduce your precious blue sphere to a sterile, irradiated cinder. The countdown begins now. Down on the surface, time seemed to coagulate into a thick, suffocating syrup. All commercial activity, all transportation, and all petty human conflicts instantly ceased. Billions of men, women, and children poured into the streets, their faces pale and completely drained of hope. Staring upward at the monstrous silver daggers hanging impossibly in the sky, the sheer visual weight of the enemy fleet was absolute, pressing down on the collective human psyche like a massive physical burden. Panic gave way to a numb, paralyzing dread. Mothers tightly clutched their infants, and hardened soldiers gripped their useless rifles, waiting for the sky to catch fire. But the most terrifying aspect of the countdown was the total lack of resistance. Not a single terrestrial fighter jet scrambled from the hidden underground bases. Not one primitive orbital defense platform fired a warning shot. The entire military apparatus of Earth remained absolutely frozen, offering no shields, no interceptors, and no heroic final charge. To the weeping masses below and the arrogant aliens above, humanity appeared completely broken, entirely paralyzed by the overwhelming majesty of imperial might. However, deep within the heavily cloaked, gravity-shielded command center of Project Abyss, floating completely invisible, just a few hundred miles away from the Kalen flagship, Dr. Ella Foster was anything but paralyzed. She stood perfectly still before a massive holographic tactical display, her sharp eyes rapidly tracking the shifting spectral data of the enemy fleet. The command deck was bathed in a dim, bloody red light, echoing with the rapid, synchronized keystrokes of 300 elite tactical officers. The invisible beast humanity had forged was holding its breath, its mechanical heart racing with the immense power of a captive star, completely hidden within the tight folds of bent light. Ella simply watched the bright red icons of the 12 dreadnoughts slowly drift deeper into the mathematically calculated kill zone. The Kalen vessels, utterly confident in their absolute supremacy, were arrogantly grouping tighter together, perfectly aligning their primary cannons to maximize the planetary bombardment. She did not sweat. She did not blink. She merely waited for the enemy to step perfectly into the dead center of the invisible snare. The grueling 60 minutes rapidly bled away. The digital clocks on Earth hit zero. High above, the Kalen commander sneered in sheer disgust at the stubborn silence of the primitive apes and brutally slammed his heavy hand onto the firing console. Across the bellies of the 12 super dreadnoughts, massive crystalline focusing lenses began to burn with a blinding, apocalyptic white light. The hum of gathering destruction vibrated so violently it could be physically felt by the billions of terrified humans cowering on the ground below. The annihilation beams were just mere fractions of a second away from absolute discharge, but before a single photon of destructive energy could leave the alien barrels, the fundamental fabric of the universe itself violently revolted. The empty, silent vacuum of space directly surrounding the 12 Imperial warships suddenly and violently deformed, twisting inward like a crushed piece of paper. The pristine vacuum of space, right in the dead center of the majestic Kalen formation, violently shattered. The optical distortion field that had perfectly cloaked Project Abyss was instantaneously dropped, violently snapping the bent light back into its natural state with a blinding, kaleidoscopic flash of raw radiation. Where there was absolutely nothing, just a fraction of a second prior, a monstrous, heavily scarred 8-kilometer-long nightmare of steel and gravity violently materialized. It did not simply drop into orbit. It brutally asserted its existence right between the tightly packed flagships of the 7th Punitive Fleet. The sudden, massive displacement of cosmic mass created a localized gravitational shockwave, violently rocking the delicate stabilization thrusters of the alien super dreadnoughts and sending their navigation computers into a frantic cascade of error warnings. The Kalen fleet commander, his scaled hands still hovering confidently over the firing mechanism of his planetary annihilation array, stared at his main viewport in absolute, paralyzing horror. The scrap heap, the obsolete Alpha-class derelict they had casually thrown away 3 years ago as a cruel joke, had returned from the grave. But it was no longer Kalen property. It was a terrifying, jagged beast bristling with ugly, brutalist terrestrial cannons, throbbing with a dark, contained fury. Before the highly trained alien tactical officers could even begin to comprehend the impossible sensor readings flooding their pristine consoles. Dr. Ella Foster executed the second phase of her masterstroke, standing bathed in the harsh, bloody red tactical light of her hidden command deck, surrounded by hundreds of silently working human engineers. She calmly ordered the gravity core pushed to maximum inverted capacity, the captive black hole, humming furiously deep within the reinforced bowels of the stolen ship, roared an incredibly deep, resonant note as its polarity was weaponized. A violently localized spatial storm erupted outward in a 360-degree spherical wave. This was not a conventional electromagnetic pulse or a primitive hacking attempt. It was a fundamental disruption of local spacetime, the shimmering, impenetrable golden energy shields of the 12 Kalen super-dreadnoughts, designed to effortlessly withstand the blistering heat of a dying star or the focused impact of antimatter torpedoes, were utterly useless against a gravitational shear. The magnificent shields flickered violently, changing from a glowing gold to a sickly, unstable purple, and then completely shattered into nothingness like fragile glass crushed under a heavy iron hammer. The sudden, catastrophic loss of their primary defense network plunged the alien vessels into absolute chaos, their internal warning alarms screaming in a deafening symphony of sudden, inescapable vulnerability. "Give them everything," Ella commanded, her voice carrying an icy calm that was completely devoid of any mercy or hesitation. All along the brutalized, heavily welded hull of the human dreadnought, the massive, mechanically fed artillery bays roared to life with a deafening mechanical clatter. This was the precise moment the kinetic slingshot was finally unleashed, utilizing the immense, localized pull of the caged singularity. Thousands of ultra-dense tungsten pillars, mined straight from the crust of the Earth, were violently accelerated around the event horizon. They were fired directly into the unshielded flanks of the Imperial fleet at exactly 99% the speed of light. There were no flashy laser beams, no elegant plasma bolts, and no explosive warheads. This was the pure, unadulterated brutality of raw mass, multiplying astronomical speed. The terrestrial slugs slammed into the pristine silver armor of the Kalen warships with catastrophic, mind-numbing kinetic force. The Imperial hull plating, widely touted as the absolute strongest alloy in the known galaxy, offered absolutely no resistance to the relativistic impact. The heavy tungsten rods punched completely through the 15-kilometer-long alien vessels, entering one side and violently exploding out the other, leaving gaping, molten exit wounds bleeding atmosphere and crew members out into the freezing vacuum of space. Panic, raw and completely unfiltered, finally broke the legendary, centuries-old discipline of the Kalen Armada. The fleet commander, screaming wildly in his native tongue while physically throwing his junior officers away from their consoles, ordered a full, desperate retaliation. The surviving alien gunners frantically fired every single remaining weapon in their vast arsenal. Torrents of superheated plasma, intensely focused antimatter beams, and swarms of highly intelligent seeker missiles erupted from the bleeding alien warships, all furiously converging on the dark, heavily scarred hull of Project Abyss. But the human vessel did not even attempt to execute an evasive maneuver. As the overwhelming wave of advanced alien firepower rapidly closed the distance, it struck the invisible, swirling gravity well actively generated by the black hole. The fundamental, unyielding laws of physics instantly broke the Kalen counterattack. The perfectly focused laser beams violently bent and refracted around the human ship, harmlessly dispersing their blinding energy into the deep cosmic void. The highly intelligent missiles, caught in the devastating gravitational whip, had their sophisticated targeting systems completely crushed by the immense pressure. The localized gravity field aggressively grabbed the explosive projectiles, spun them violently around the human hull, and hurled them right back at their original launching bays with terrifying speed. The aliens watched in sheer, absolute horror as their own devastating weapons slammed back into their heavily damaged hulls, tearing open massive secondary explosions that cascaded across the entire Imperial formation. The invincible 7th Punitive Fleet was utterly broken in less than 3 minutes of actual combat. They were heavily bleeding oxygen, their advanced weapons were completely useless, and their incredibly proud hulls were riddled with gaping, burning holes. The tactical advantage held by humanity was completely, undeniably overwhelming. Ella Foster could have very easily ordered one final kinetic barrage to permanently erase every single alien vessel and their arrogant crews from existence. But she recognized that absolute annihilation would teach the massive empire nothing but useless martyrdom. Instead, she coldly ordered the human navigation team to execute a highly concentrated, directed spatial implosion, precisely targeting the rear engine blocks of the entire enemy fleet. The gravitational anomaly violently compressed around them, instantly crushing the glowing fusion drives of all 12 super dreadnoughts into incredibly dense, dead lumps of cold, twisted metal. The majestic Kalen fleet was instantly paralyzed. They were no longer a planetary threat. They were just 12 massive, dark pieces of useless scrap iron, trapped helplessly in the orbital pull of the Earth. Inside his smoking, dimly lit command bridge, choking on electrical fires and the metallic taste of his own bleeding pride, the arrogant Kalen commander was forced to do the unthinkable. Trembling with sheer humiliation and absolute terror, he physically reached out and activated the broad-spectrum emergency channel, broadcasting a pathetic, desperate plea for an immediate ceasefire and a distress beacon back to his distant emperor. He fully expected to be mocked, brutally tortured, or immediately executed by the primitive apes he had come to exterminate. The static violently crackled over the ship-wide speakers, and then the cold, incredibly steady, and unwavering voice of Dr. Ella Foster filled the ruined alien bridge. "Your distress signal is being permitted to leave this solar system," Ella stated, her tone carrying the heavy, terrifying weight of an absolute, undeniable victory. "Make sure your mighty emperor listens to it very carefully. You came here fully expecting to find a massive planetary graveyard, and then you arrogantly tried to build one yourselves when you realized we fiercely refused to die. Tell your high command that humanity is no longer a crawling infant species waiting to be stepped on. We have captured the dark heart of your own technology, and we have married it directly to our uncompromising will to survive. Earth is permanently closed to imperial business, and we are absolutely no longer the dumpster of this galaxy. If you or any other fleet ever dares to cross into our territory again, we will not just break your pathetic ships. We will bring the abyss directly to your home world." With that final, chilling transmission, the communication link was permanently severed from the human side. The human race, a species that had been cruelly sentenced to a slow, suffocating extinction just 3 short years ago, had violently overthrown their cosmic executioners by harnessing the absolute terrifying power of the very weapon that was meant to destroy them. They had forged themselves into a new, incredibly formidable galactic power. They had taken the arrogant, blind contempt of an ancient empire and melted it down in the fires of their own desperation, forging a magnificent, unstoppable sword that would forever dictate their own destiny among the stars. Thank you so much for listening to today's story. We hope you enjoyed it. As an ad-free channel, your support is what keeps us alive. Please support Sci-Fi stories with just $1 via the QR code on the screen, or click the link in the description box or pinned comment. Also, we'd love to connect with you. Please leave a comment telling us which city or state you're listening from. Thank you for standing with us, and see you in the next stories.